Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe for more amazing HFY stories. Hit the bell icon to get notified about our latest uploads. The Galactic Senate had long been mired in corruption, its halls echoing with the whispers of bribed votes and manipulated alliances. For centuries, the galaxy's many species, each with their own histories, cultures, and secrets, had been kept apart by distrust and division. The alliance was fractured, its unity hanging by a thread that had been frayed by greed, power struggles, and ancient enmities. But amidst this chaos, one voice rose above the rest, an unexpected alliance between a human diplomat and an alien princess, both driven by the same ideal, to bring an end to the corruption and forge a lasting peace in the galaxy. Ambassador Liam Drake stood at the front of the crowded council chamber, the hum of nervous chatter echoing through the room. His sharp eyes scanned the faces of the galaxy's most powerful leaders, each one representing a different faction of the vast cosmic alliance. There were the sleek, silver-skinned Jordai, with their tall, angular bodies and cold, calculating minds. The towering Vex Nar, their reptilian faces rigid and unyielding, eyes like burning coals. The Trolloc, short and squat, their thick, armored skin a testament to their strength. And many more, a swirl of diverse species, all gathered for a singular purpose, the election of the Galactic High Chancellor. Drake wasn't supposed to be here. A mere human, unremarkable in the face of centuries-old alien cultures. His people had only recently joined the galactic stage, and many saw them as weak, impulsive, and unworthy of the power they now sought. But Drake had spent his years as a diplomat building bridges where there were none, healing wounds left by past conflicts, and advocating for cooperation over conquest. And now, his moment had arrived. Beside him stood Princess Alyra of the Illyrians, a species of ethereal beings known for their advanced telepathic abilities and long lives. Alyra was young by her people's standards, barely over 300 years old, but she was already one of the most respected figures in her empire. Her beauty, however, wasn't what made her stand out. It was her vision of a united galaxy that had earned her the respect of even the most hardened leaders. We can no longer afford to live in the shadow of the past, Alyra's voice rang out, resonating with the pure, almost melodic cadence of her species. The galaxy is on the brink. Our unity has been compromised by corruption, by greed, by fear. But if we stand together, if we open our hearts and minds, we can change the course of history. We will no longer be divided by our differences, but united by our shared future. The room fell silent. The alien leaders exchanged glances, some skeptical, others intrigued. But all knew that the stakes were high. Corruption had taken root in the Galactic Senate, and the powerful elite had grown comfortable with the status quo. The current High Chancellor, Arcturus Vel, was a man whose wealth was immeasurable, his influence unquestioned. But he was a man who cared only for his own power, indifferent to the suffering of those beneath him. Drake and Alyra's alliance was an unexpected one. At first, many had dismissed the human diplomat's efforts, thinking it a fool's errand. A human and an Illyrian princess, attempting to topple centuries of systemic corruption and challenge the established order. It was a long shot, to say the least. But Alyra's conviction, coupled with Drake's experience in the political arena, made them a formidable pair. Together, they had traveled to the farthest reaches of the galaxy, speaking to the oppressed, the forgotten, and the downtrodden. They had rallied support from planets that had been ignored for centuries, promising them a voice in the future of the galaxy. And now, they were here, standing before the very beings who had the power to make or break their campaign. The people have spoken, Drake said, his voice steady and filled with resolve. It is not just the elites who suffer under this corrupt system. It is the workers on the mining worlds, the farmers on the agricultural colonies, the children of war-torn planets. We cannot ignore them any longer. They deserve a future of hope, not despair. Vel's supporters shifted uneasily in their seats. The current chancellor had long enjoyed the luxury of controlling the narrative, manipulating the masses with promises of prosperity that were never fulfilled. But now, Drake and Elira were offering something far more dangerous, the truth. Vel himself was seated at the far end of the room, his cold eyes watching with the intensity of a predator. He was an imposing figure, tall and broad-shouldered, with the hard features of a man who had fought and clawed his way to power. His face was a mask of calm, but his thoughts were anything but. He knew the risk they posed. If they succeeded, his reign would crumble. "This is absurd," Vel spoke, his voice booming across the chamber. "You ask for unity, but at what cost? You seek to weaken our strength, to tear down the foundations of our power. I will not stand for it. My vision is one of security, of strength. Yours is nothing more than a naive dream." Drake's jaw tightened. He knew the challenge they faced. But he had seen too much suffering, too many lives lost to the greed of the powerful, to back down now. "We are not asking for weakness, Chancellor," Elira replied, her voice calm but fierce. "We are asking for strength in unity. A galaxy that stands together will be far stronger than one ruled by division." The room was still. It was a delicate moment, one that would shape the fate of the galaxy. The election was only days away, but the campaign had already begun. And in the silence of that chamber, the seeds of revolution were being sown. The tension in the council chamber was palpable, a thick fog of anticipation hanging over every word exchanged. The audience, made up of the galaxy's most powerful figures, seemed torn, some captivated by the noble ideals of Ambassador Drake and Princess Elira, others wary of the radical changes they promised. The debate had barely begun, but already, it felt like a war for the soul of the galaxy. Arcturus Vel, the current High Chancellor, leaned forward in his seat, his gaze never leaving Drake and Elira. His lips curled into a thin smile, one that never quite reached his eyes. He had been in power for far too long to be swayed by idealism. His grip on the galaxy's economy, military, and politics was unshakable, and he was willing to fight dirty to keep it that way. "You speak of unity," Vel said, his voice laced with condescension. "But you fail to understand one simple truth. Power is not granted by the masses, it is seized, held, and controlled by those who are strong enough to take it. Weakness has no place in this galaxy. And you, Ambassador Drake, you are the embodiment of that weakness. A human, standing in the midst of this great council, asking us to abandon centuries of tradition and power. You'll never win their trust." The chamber murmured with uncertainty. The alien delegates exchanged uneasy glances. They had always viewed humans as newcomers to the galactic stage, young, impulsive, and unpredictable. Some feared that the galaxy was simply too vast, too complex, for a species as short-lived and disjointed as humans to manage. Vel's words echoed the doubts of many. But Drake stood tall, unwavering. He had faced worse in his years as a diplomat, covert sabotage, assassination attempts, betrayals from allies. His experience had shaped him into a resilient leader, one who knew that the road to change would be steep and full of resistance. He was not about to let Vel's words fracture the growing alliance they had worked so hard to build. "I am not asking for trust based on who I am," Drake said, his voice steady and commanding. "I am asking for it based on what we can build together. The corrupt system that Vel represents has failed the people. The galaxy is bleeding, and if we continue down this path, it will tear itself apart. It's not about the individual, it's about the future." Princess Elira stepped forward, her presence commanding the attention of the room. Despite her ethereal beauty, it was the depth in her eyes that captivated those around her, the centuries of knowledge and experience that flowed through her as naturally as the air she breathed. "The people know the truth," she said, her voice echoing across the chamber. "They know the cost of inaction, the cost of complacency. They have seen their homes ravaged by war, their families starving while the elites feast. The people are not blind. They can feel the weight of oppression every day. We will stand with them. We will fight for their future." Vel's grip tightened on the armrest of his chair. The Illyrians were an ancient species, far older and wiser than humans. But the very fact that Elira stood beside Drake, challenging his authority, made her a threat. He had made his fortune through manipulation, through playing the factions against each other. He had built a web of power that spanned galaxies. To dismantle that was to challenge everything he had worked for. And the thought of his empire crumbling was unbearable. "You are naive," Vel sneered. "The people are easily swayed by promises. They don't understand the intricacies of governance, of what it takes to hold a galaxy together. You talk about peace, about unity, but those are mere words. Words won't keep the galaxy from spiraling into chaos." Drake's face remained calm, but inside, he felt the burn of anger. Vel's words weren't just a threat, they were a taunt. The Chancellor wanted to undermine their message, to discredit them, to make it seem as though the very idea of unity was impossible. But Drake had learned long ago that in politics, there were no easy victories. And if they were going to win this fight, they needed more than just idealism, they needed a strategy that would resonate with the people. They needed to make the galaxy see the truth. "The galaxy is already in chaos, Chancellor," Drake responded, his voice quiet but firm. "It's just hidden beneath the surface. But the cracks are starting to show. The people are waking up. And no matter how much you try to bury them, no matter how much you control the media or manipulate the elections, they won't stay silent forever." The room grew quiet again. The alien leaders were listening more intently now, watching the exchange with growing curiosity. There was something in Drake's words, something that struck a chord. They had all seen the tensions rising in their own territories, minor skirmishes between factions, economic instability, rebellion brewing in the most unlikely of places. Vel's reign, as secure as it seemed, was beginning to crumble around the edges. Elira turned to the assembled leaders, her eyes flashing with conviction. "We are not here to tear down the foundations of this galaxy. We are here to rebuild them. To heal the wounds that have been festering for centuries. But that will require trust. It will require sacrifice. We are asking you to join us, not in abandoning your power, but in sharing it. For the good of all." The delegates were silent, their thoughts a tangled web of doubt and desire. Some saw the promise of a united galaxy as a glimmer of hope in the darkness. Others saw it as an existential threat to their own interests. The divide was clear, and the upcoming election would not be easy. But in the back of the room, unnoticed by most, a few figures were beginning to stir. Among the crowd of powerful aliens and senators, there were a few who had once stood on the side of the status quo, but whose hearts had begun to waver. These were the people Drake and Elira had been speaking to for months, the oppressed, the voiceless. They were the ones who had seen the cracks in Vel's empire first, and now, they could feel the heat of a new fire rising from the ashes. One by one, small gestures were made. A nod here, a subtle exchange of looks there. Slowly, the tides were turning. But Vel was not one to give up without a fight. "You think you can change the galaxy in your image?" Vel's voice cut through the silence, low and venomous. "You think you can replace centuries of tradition with your idealistic fantasy? The galaxy is not a toy. It is not a playground for your utopian dreams." Drake took a step forward, his eyes hardening. "We are not here to play, Chancellor. We're here to change the course of history." Elira's calm gaze never wavered, though her mind was racing. The election was only days away, but already the battle lines had been drawn. There was no turning back now. This would be a fight for everything they believed in, and the galaxy's future would hang in the balance. The days leading up to the election were tense, filled with whispered conversations in shadowed corridors and the quiet rustle of campaign pamphlets passed from one hand to the next. Ambassador Liam Drake and Princess Elira had taken their message across the galaxy, but the battle was far from won. In fact, it was only just beginning. Drake and Elira sat together in a small, secure meeting room, the walls lined with holographic maps and data streams from across the galaxy. A map of the galaxy was projected before them, the colors shifting and flickering as the votes and allegiances of each system were tallied in real time. But the numbers didn't bring them comfort. There were still far too many variables in play. "The question isn't whether we have support," Drake said, running a hand through his hair. "We have the people behind us. But Vel's network runs deep. He's more than just a chancellor, he's the puppet master behind the scenes. Every faction, every influential leader, is in his pocket one way or another." Alyra nodded, her mind already racing through potential strategies. She had seen it before, systems under Vel's thumb, their leaders too afraid or too complicit to make a change. For centuries, the Illyrians had tried to stay above the political squabbles of the galaxy, content to observe, but that had changed with her. She had learned, through careful diplomacy, how to win hearts and minds, but even she knew the price of crossing the Chancellor was steep. "He's more dangerous than we thought," she said. "Vel has allies everywhere. The syndicates, the militarists, even some of the more conservative factions in the council. We can't just rely on the masses, we need a solid strategy to neutralize his influence." Drake's eyes were fixed on the projections of the voting districts. The key systems were still undecided, and the larger, more influential factions had yet to make their final choices. The warlords of the Outer Rim, the merchants of the Soran trade bloc, and the shadowy criminal syndicates, each of them had the power to sway the vote, and Vel had been playing both sides for decades. "Then we need to play smarter," Drake said. "We know Vel's weaknesses. We need to turn the tables on him before he can do it to us." Alyra leaned forward, the projection of the galaxy shifting under her touch as she zoomed in on the rim worlds, a cluster of planets known for their lawlessness, but also for their fierce independence. They had been allies of Vel in the past, but the galactic unrest had given them an opening. They were the wild card in the election. If they sided with Vel, it could tip the balance. If they sided with Drake and Alyra, it would give their campaign the momentum it needed to break Vel's hold on the galaxy. "We have one shot at this," Alyra said. "We need to gain the support of the Rim worlds. Without them, we lose everything." Drake nodded, his mind already working through the options. "It's not just a political deal we're offering them. The Rim worlds have been exploited for too long. If we can promise them real autonomy, a chance to break free from Vel's stranglehold, they might join us. It's a gamble, but it's our best shot." The room was silent for a moment, the weight of their decisions pressing down on both of them. There was no room for error. The election was mere days away, and the fate of the galaxy hung in the balance. Meanwhile, across the galaxy, Chancellor Vel was preparing his own strategy. He had spent years building his empire, using every trick in the book to keep his opponents in check. He knew the stakes of this election better than anyone, and he wasn't about to let some upstart human diplomat and a naive princess undo everything he had worked for. Vel was seated in a lavish, high-ceilinged chamber, his fingers steepled in front of him. Across from him sat two of his most trusted allies, Admiral Korath of the Vexnar fleet, and the infamous syndicate leader, Zoltar Creel, a sly and calculating figure whose criminal empire spanned countless systems. "You've heard the news, I presume?" Vel said, his voice low and dangerous. Korath, the towering reptilian admiral, growled softly in response. "The human and the Illyrian are gaining ground. The Outer Rim is in play, and their rhetoric about unity is spreading like wildfire." Vel's lips curled into a cruel smile. "They think they can undo everything I've built. But they fail to understand the true power of this galaxy. It's not about idealism, it's about control. The galaxy is a beast that must be tamed, not freed." Zoltar Creel, the syndicate leader, leaned forward, his eyes gleaming with sharp interest. "We have a few tricks left to play, Chancellor. The Rim worlds may be a threat, but they can also be an asset. If we offer them more than just promises, they'll fall into line." Vel turned to the syndicate leader, his brow furrowing in thought. "What do you have in mind?" Creel's grin widened. We can manufacture a crisis. The Rim worlds have been on the edge of rebellion for years. A few well-placed destabilizing events, pirates, attacks on trade routes, and they'll be begging for protection. We can use that to force them into our camp. Vel's smile grew. Yes. And while they're distracted with their own turmoil, we can break the back of Drake and Elira's support. Fear will do what diplomacy cannot. The plan was set in motion. Vel's agents were already deploying across the Rim worlds, sowing discord and creating unrest. The syndicates would stir the pot, and Karatha's fleet would be ready to move in if things escalated. They would make the Rim worlds think that they were in danger, then swoop in with promises of security and protection. It was the perfect strategy. But Vel was not counting on the resilience of his opponents. On the Rim worlds, Drake and Elira were making their case, meeting with the local leaders, listening to the frustrations of the people. They knew the syndicates were stirring trouble, but they had prepared for this. They had a plan of their own, one that would counter Vel's machinations. We can offer them something more than fear, Elira said. We can offer them hope. A real future. The syndicates will try to frighten them into submission, but we have the chance to show them a different path. Drake was already speaking with the leaders of the Rim world's major factions, small, independent systems, but fiercely loyal to their traditions. They were wary of outsiders, and trust would not come easily. But Drake had learned long ago that the most effective way to win someone's trust was not through promises, but through actions. He had to prove that his intentions were true. If we can unite the Rim worlds, show them that they are not alone, Drake said, we can tip the scales in our favor. Vel's power relies on division, on fear. If we bring the Rim worlds together, give them a shared cause, we win. Elira nodded, her mind already racing ahead. We need a bold gesture. Something that shows we are serious about their autonomy. It's the only way we can pull them away from Vel. The final days of the election were closing in. The battle for the Rim worlds would determine the outcome of the galaxy's fate. And both sides knew that everything was riding on this fragile alliance. The tension was palpable in the Rim worlds. For decades, these independent systems had existed on the fringes of galactic politics, left to fend for themselves while the greater powers of the galaxy played their games. They were rich in resources, rugged and fiercely autonomous, but they had always struggled to defend themselves from the machinations of larger, more powerful factions. Now, the galaxy's most ambitious political struggle had come to their doorstep, and they would be forced to choose a side. Ambassador Liam Drake and Princess Elira had arrived on Varran, the largest of the Rim worlds, a harsh desert planet with sprawling mining colonies and vast energy fields. The planet had a history of rebellion. Its people had fought against the central government's attempts to control their resources more than once. It was a place where hope was a luxury, and distrust ran deep. But there was a stirring in the air, something different. People were talking, whispering of a new future, one that offered them a chance to stand shoulder to shoulder with the galaxy's leaders, instead of being treated as pawns. Drake stood at the podium in front of the Varran Council, flanked by Elira, as a crowd of skeptical leaders and citizens gathered before them. The wind outside howled through the city's vast, metal skeletons of buildings, the desolate landscape stretching out beyond the horizon. Varran was not a beautiful planet, but its people were proud of their survival, proud of their independence. We stand at the edge of a new dawn, Drake began, his voice carrying across the dusty expanse. A galaxy divided by corruption and greed is no longer a future worth fighting for. We are offering you something different, a chance to be part of something greater, a future built on unity, not division. Elira stepped forward, her presence as calm and dignified as ever. For too long, the galaxy has been controlled by the powerful few, who would rather see you crushed than see you rise. But the people of the Rim worlds are not weak. You are not powerless. Together, we can take back what is rightfully yours. The crowd murmured, uncertainty hanging in the air. Some faces were wary, eyes narrowed in distrust. Others seemed intrigued by what they heard. It was a hard sell. The Rim worlds had heard similar promises before, only to be left abandoned when the greater powers moved on to other pursuits. "We are not here to make empty promises," Drake continued. "We are here to show you that you have value, that your voices matter, that you are not alone in your fight. But we need your support. Together, we can build a galaxy where no one is left behind." A voice rose from the crowd, a deep, gravelly tone that carried a hint of skepticism. "And what makes you think we should trust you, human? You've got your own problems back home, fighting for your place in the galaxy. What makes you think you can solve ours?" Drake didn't flinch. He had heard it all before. But this wasn't just about words, it was about action. He needed to prove that their campaign was more than just political rhetoric. It had to be a vision that people could believe in. "We've already begun," Elira said, her voice unwavering. "In the last month, we've worked with leaders from several of your neighboring systems to establish trade routes that would allow you to bypass the chokehold that Vel's allies have on your economy. We've already made real, tangible progress. This is not just talk." The crowd stirred. It wasn't much, but it was something. The Rim worlds had long been held hostage by galactic trade monopolies controlled by the likes of Vel's allies. The idea that someone was finally offering them a way out was powerful. But then, a new voice interrupted, the deep rumble of an imposing figure stepping forward, clad in the rough, dusty armor of a local warlord. His face was hidden beneath a helmet, but his aura was unmistakable. The crowd parted as he approached the podium, his eyes locked on Drake and Elira. "I am Barracks of the Resh," the warlord's voice boomed, his tone full of challenge. "You think you can free us from Vel? You think we'll simply abandon the Chancellor who has kept us safe for so long? You don't know what you're dealing with." The air grew thick with tension. The Resh were a formidable people, known for their brutal efficiency in battle. They had once served as Vel's enforcers on the Rim worlds, ensuring that any insurrection was swiftly crushed. If Barracks had come to oppose them, it would be a blow to Drake and Elira's chances. Elira stepped forward, her expression calm but firm. "We are not here to destroy your way of life, Barracks. We are here to offer you a new path. A path where you no longer serve the whims of a corrupt leader, but one where you stand as equals with the rest of the galaxy. The future of the Rim worlds is yours to shape." Barracks let out a short, derisive laugh. "And you think the galaxy will just bend to your will? You're asking us to turn our backs on Vel, the man who has provided us with the security we need. What guarantees do you offer?" Drake's eyes narrowed. "What security has Vel provided, Barracks? Your people have been oppressed, and your economy has been plundered by the very system that Vel represents. The people are tired of being pawns in his game. The promise we offer isn't one of servitude, it's one of freedom." Barracks's hand tightened on the hilt of his weapon, and for a moment, the crowd held its breath. But then, in an unexpected move, the warlord stepped back, his voice quiet but dangerous. "You speak of freedom, but you're not the first to do so. I've seen promises made before, only to be broken. If you want our support, you'll need to do more than talk. You'll need to show us that you're willing to risk everything. Vel's people will not go down without a fight. And neither will we." The warlord's words were a challenge, and a warning. The stakes had just been raised, and it was clear that Drake and Elira would need more than promises to win over the Rim worlds. They needed action. They needed to demonstrate that they had the strength to back up their words. As the meeting ended, Drake and Elira retreated to their ship, the weight of the situation settling heavily on their shoulders. The Resh were not an easy people to win over, and Barracks's defiance had put them in a precarious position. But they had come too far to back down now. "The Rim worlds are divided," Elira said quietly as they walked down the narrow hallway. "Barracks is not alone in his distrust. If we don't act quickly, we risk losing everything." Drake's expression was hard, his eyes determined. "Then we'll have to show them what we're made of. If Vel's going to play dirty, then so will we. We'll make sure the Rim worlds see what kind of future they'll have under his rule, and what kind of future they could have with us. The clock was ticking. The election was only days away, and the outcome hinged on whether or not they could secure the loyalty of the Rim worlds. They had won the hearts of the people, but now they needed to prove that they could protect them. If they couldn't, if they failed to act decisively, they would lose everything. The galaxy's future would slip through their fingers, and Vel would continue his reign of corruption and fear. Drake and Elira knew that the gamble they were about to take could either make or break their campaign. They had to act, and they had to do it fast. The weight of the election bore down on Ambassador Liam Drake and Princess Elira as they prepared for the final days of their campaign. The galaxy was watching, but the most crucial systems, the Rim worlds, remained locked in a delicate balance. They had made their case, and the people were divided. Their supporters were loud, but the enemies they faced were powerful. The real battle was about to begin. It was on the dusty plains of Varran, just outside the city limits, that the next phase of their strategy would unfold. The Rim worlds had always been a place where strength mattered. Words were one thing, but actions spoke louder. And the actions that would change the course of the galaxy would come in the form of a bold, high-risk mission, one that would prove to the people of the Rim that they could count on Drake and Elira to defend them, no matter the cost. Drake and Elira stood together in the war room aboard their flagship, the Elysium. The walls hummed with the soft buzz of communication devices and the steady thrum of ship engines. The stars outside the viewport were quiet and distant, but inside, the atmosphere was charged with urgency. Barracks and his Resh may have given us a challenge, but the situation is worse than we thought, Drake said, his fingers tapping a map of Varran's eastern regions. There's been a new development. Vel's forces have begun fortifying the southern trade routes. If they succeed in locking down those routes, we lose all the leverage we've gained with the Rim worlds. Elira's eyes narrowed as she processed the information. She had known that Vel would try to keep the Rim worlds in line with intimidation and brute force. But what shocked her was the scale of the operation. They were moving faster than anticipated, and their ability to control vital trade routes would give them an iron grip over the Rim. If the people saw that Vel could shut off their economy whenever he wished, it could break their resolve. "We can't let them do this," she said, her voice steady but resolute. "The people of Varran will never trust us if they believe we can't protect them from his reach." Drake agreed, his jaw tightening as he stood. "We need to strike first, Elira. We can't wait for Vel to make his move. If we give him control of the trade routes, we lose the election and the future of the galaxy. We need to hit them before they complete their blockade." Elira met his gaze, her expression thoughtful. "I agree, but it's a dangerous plan. The Vel-aligned forces are too strong. We'd be walking into a trap." "I know," Drake replied. "But we don't have a choice. We'll have to divide their forces. We can't take them head-on, but if we hit their supply lines, their command centers, if we force them to fight on multiple fronts, we can buy enough time to turn the tide." Elira took a deep breath. It was a gamble, one that would put their forces at great risk. But if they didn't act now, the galaxy would fall deeper into corruption, and the hope of unity would slip through their fingers. "I'll have the fleet ready within the hour," she said. The battle began at dawn. Drake's forces, a mix of loyal Rim world militias and independent fighters who had rallied to their cause, attacked the supply depots that Vel's forces had set up along the southern trade routes. Elira led the charge, her Illyrian fleet striking from the sky, her ships swift and deadly. But the enemy was waiting. Vel had anticipated an attack, and his soldiers were entrenched, well prepared. Despite the odds, Drake and Elira's forces were relentless. They fought with a fury born of desperation, their tactics unorthodox but effective. They struck in small, highly mobile groups, using the terrain to their advantage. The fleet hovered above, engaging Vel's forces from a distance while ground troops infiltrated key positions. On the battlefield, Elira's leadership shone through. Her knowledge of military strategy, gained through years of diplomatic negotiations and internal Illyrian training, allowed her to adapt to every twist and turn of the fight. She knew that they couldn't sustain a prolonged conflict, so they hit hard and fast, disrupting Vel's supply lines and sowing confusion among his forces. Drake, meanwhile, worked tirelessly behind the scenes, coordinating with the Rim World militias and ensuring that they were in position to take advantage of every opening. His experience in human diplomacy and military strategy was invaluable. It was clear to the Rim World forces that he wasn't just a politician, he was a man who understood what it meant to fight for survival. In the chaos of the battle, one of Vel's primary supply depots fell. The explosion lit up the sky, sending a shockwave through the surrounding area. The ground shook beneath their feet as Vel's forces scrambled to respond, their carefully laid plans now in disarray. But the real victory came when Elira's fleet intercepted a convoy of vital reinforcements, cutting off the enemy's ability to resupply their positions. It was a decisive blow, but the battle was far from over. Back in the heart of the city, news of the battle spread quickly. The Rim World leaders gathered, watching as their future played out on the holoscreens. The tide was turning, but the outcome was still uncertain. The battle for the southern trade routes had been a success, but it was only one piece of a much larger puzzle. "We've done it," Elira said, her voice crackling with static as she communicated with the command center. "The blockade is broken, but the fight isn't over." Drake stood at her side, his eyes focused on the data streaming in. "No. This is just the beginning. Vel will strike back. We've made him bleed, and he won't tolerate it. But we've shown the people that we can defend them. That we're not just talk, we are action." "We've bought some time," Elira replied, glancing at the map. "But if we don't press our advantage, Vel will come at us with everything he has. We need to move quickly." "I'll contact the Rim World leaders," Drake said, already stepping toward the communication hub. "We need their support now. We've proven that we can win, but they have to know we can do it together. If they stand with us, we'll have the momentum we need to take back the galaxy." But as Drake turned to make the call, a sudden explosion rocked the city. It wasn't the distant rumble of a ground assault. No, this was different. This was closer. Much closer. The ground trembled beneath their feet. An alarm blared, its shrill sound piercing the air. The city's security systems flickered, and the lights went out. The Rim World leaders scrambled, ducking for cover as the sky above darkened with the ominous shadow of Vel's fleet descending on them. It wasn't over. Far from it. Vel's retaliation had begun. The chaos inside the Varran city was immediate and deafening. The blast had come from above, a direct hit to the planetary defense grid, sending massive shockwaves through the streets. Drake and Elira were thrown off balance, but they quickly regained their footing. The city, once a symbol of hope for the Rim worlds, now seemed on the brink of collapse. Drake's comms device buzzed with urgent messages from his fleet. "Vel's forces have initiated a full-scale airstrike," the voice crackled. "They're deploying shock troops to the city's perimeter." Elira's eyes hardened. She had known Vel would retaliate. She had known it was coming. But nothing could have prepared them for the sheer force of his response. Vel had thrown everything he had at them, and Varran was the prize he wanted most. "We have to hold this ground," Elira said, her voice cold with determination. "If we lose Varran, the whole Rim collapses. The galaxy will fall back into the hands of the corrupt." Drake nodded grimly. "We've already shown the Rim that we're willing to fight. Now, we need to prove that we can win. It's time to rally the people of Varran." The air was thick with smoke, and the streets were chaos as Vel's forces began their descent. The city's once proud architecture now lay in ruins, shattered by the relentless bombardment. In the midst of the destruction, Elira's fleet remained in the sky, maneuvering to intercept enemy reinforcements. But the true battle was happening on the ground. Drake led a small contingent of fighters through. The devastation was all-encompassing. Varan, the once bustling jewel of the Rim worlds, had become a war zone. Smoke and ash filled the air as Vel's forces descended upon the city, the sun obscured by the dark clouds of conflict. Buildings that had once stood tall and proud now lay in ruins, their skeletons jutting from the ground like the bones of some ancient, forgotten giant. The air was thick with the sounds of explosions, the cries of civilians fleeing for their lives, and the relentless hum of battle. But in the midst of the chaos, Ambassador Liam Drake and Princess Elira Illyria stood resolute. They had come this far, and they weren't going to let Vel destroy the hope they had fought for. "We need to push forward," Drake said, his voice steady despite the turmoil around them. His hand gripped the comms device tightly as he sent orders to his fleet. "We've bought time, but we can't sit back and wait. If we don't take the central command hub, we lose everything. Vel's forces will overrun the city, and it's only a matter of time before they turn their full attention to the Rim worlds." Elira nodded, her face hardened with the knowledge of what they were up against. "Vel's not going to give up without a fight. But we've shown the Rim that we're not just here to talk, we've backed up our words with action. And now, we finish this." The pair turned and walked towards the Central Command Center, a fortified building that had once been the heart of Varan's defense. The city's outer perimeter was swarming with Vel's shock troops, but they had one advantage: they had the element of surprise. Drake's forces had infiltrated key areas of the city, and the Central Command Center had yet to fall into enemy hands. But it was only a matter of time before Vel's full force arrived to secure it. As they moved through the rubble-strewn streets, Drake's mind raced. He knew that every moment counted. They couldn't afford to delay. Elira's fleet had managed to create enough of a diversion in the skies to give their ground forces some breathing room, but it wouldn't last. The airspace above was thick with Vel's reinforcements, and they would soon turn their attention to the ground battle. "Contact the Rim world leaders," Drake said urgently, his comms unit flickering to life. "Tell them to start evacuating the civilians. If we're going to retake this city, we need the population to be out of harm's way. Their safety is our priority. We can't let Vel use them as leverage." Elira nodded and tapped her wrist. "I'm on it." As they approached the Central Command building, the ground began to shake beneath their feet. The deep rumble of incoming enemy tanks echoed through the streets. Vel was preparing for the final assault. "Prepare yourself," Elira said, her eyes narrowing as she scanned the battlefield. "This is it. If we fail here, it's over." Drake took a deep breath. "We won't fail." They reached the outer perimeter of the command center, where Drake's forces had already engaged Vel's troops. The area was a battleground, filled with the sounds of blaster fire and explosions. But it was clear that the enemy was starting to overwhelm them. The shock troops, though well-equipped, were under heavy fire from both Drake's forces and the remnants of the city's defense system. The Central Command building itself stood as a fortress, surrounded by heavily armed Vel soldiers and automated turrets. It was a stronghold, but one that could be breached with the right strategy. Drake turned to Elira. "We need to disable the turrets. I'll handle the infantry, you take out their air support. If we can break their control here, we'll win this fight." Elira nodded, her eyes focused on the task ahead. "I'll do my part. Don't get yourself killed." Drake offered her a small, reassuring smile. "You too." And with that, they split. Elira's fleet took position in the sky, weaving through enemy fire to engage the larger ships, while Drake led his troops in a frontal assault on the command center's defenses. The battle for the Central Command hub was unlike anything they had fought before. Drake and his soldiers pushed through the outer perimeter, taking out enemy reinforcements with well-coordinated strikes. Explosions erupted around them as they moved closer to their target, the automated turrets firing relentlessly. Drake's heart raced as they neared the building's entrance. The Central Command Center loomed ahead, a monolithic structure guarded by waves of enemy soldiers. They were running out of time. Cover me! Drake shouted, signaling for his troops to lay down suppressive fire. He sprinted forward, weaving through the chaos, and reached the control terminal. With one fluid motion, he planted an explosive charge on the building's security door, knowing that this was their only chance to break through. The explosion was deafening, sending debris flying in all directions. The doors to the command center blew off their hinges, and Drake's soldiers rushed inside, guns raised. The battle within was fierce, but they had taken the first step in reclaiming the city. Alira's fleet continued its assault in the skies, cutting through Vel's air support with precision strikes. The enemy ships fell one by one, the air growing clearer as her forces gained the upper hand. Inside the command center, Drake's soldiers fought their way to the central control room, where a large holographic display showed the city's defense network. At the center of it all stood a massive control console, guarded by a handful of Vel's elite soldiers. Drake charged forward, his blaster raised. "Move!" he shouted to his soldiers. With quick, well-placed shots, he neutralized the guards, clearing the path to the control console. The terminal hummed to life as Drake activated it. The defense grid blinked on, its powerful shields enveloping the city once more. The enemy's tanks and air support, now cut off from reinforcements, were vulnerable. "Vel's forces are retreating," one of Drake's officers reported, voice shaking with disbelief. "The defense grid is back online. We've done it." Drake exhaled, a wave of relief washing over him. The tide had turned. Vel's forces, unable to recover from the sudden shift in momentum, began to fall back. Alira stood in the cockpit of her flagship, watching the skies clear as Vel's remaining forces retreated. The battle was won, but the cost had been high. Varan was in ruins, but it had survived. The Rim worlds had survived. She activated her comms. "Drake, it's done. Vel's forces are in full retreat. We've won." Drake's voice crackled through the comms. "We've only just begun, Alira. This is just the first victory. The galaxy is watching. Now, we make sure the galaxy knows what this victory means." Alira smiled, her eyes alight with determination. "Together, we'll bring unity to the galaxy. This is just the beginning." The war for the galaxy had only just begun, but for the first time in a long while, hope flickered brightly across the Rim worlds. The end. Thanks for watching, everyone. If you enjoyed this video, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe for more exciting HFY stories. Your support means the world to us. And make sure to tap the bell icon so you never miss an update. Stay tuned for our next adventure, and until then, keep exploring the stars. See you in the next video.